Back to another episode of Becoming Goodness. Every time. Thoughts of a techno wizard. Maybe I just call it the same thing. Just call it the same thing. Um, and today we're going to continue our series on Hegel, reading the phenomenology of spirit, as discussed by Dr. Gregory B. Sadler. So it's been great so far. I think today we're actually getting into chapter two. So we're finishing chapter one, or we finished chapter one last week, and now we're getting to chapter two. But let me recap what happened in the last section. So unfortunately, I was in a rush last time, and I never went back and put a summary. So unfortunately, I don't have my own summary of the last chapter or the last section, which was sections 109 through 110, the last sections of chapter one, sense certainty. But we do have Dr. Sadler's. So he says, we have learned now through the dialectical investigation into wait, yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure he didn't have anything before that. He says, finishing our study of the first portion of the section, consciousness, that is sense certainty. Okay. We have learned now through the dialectical investigation into what sense certainty is that it does not possess immediacy, but rather involves a whole complex of mediations that have progressively come to light, ultimately highlighting the role of the universal. Turning to the practical sphere, we find that the objects of sense certainty did not provide us with the truth of this essence we originally sought, but rather sensuous things exhibit their own nothingness. In trying to speak about singular individual things as what is most real, consciousness would up consciousness wound up, maybe he means, and paradoxes, since everything is an individual thing, which means individual thing is itself an abstract universal. We must turn instead to the complex universal and to the perceiving subject, which provides the content of the next section of the phenomenology. Nice. All right, so let's jump into chapter two. Very nice. Mm, mm, mm. So I'm gonna have to go back and read that. My mind was barely in it. Okay. Not just the same move as a movement, it's the unfolding and differentiation of the two movements. So in essence, the object is the same as the movement. The movement is the unfolding and differentiation of the two moments. The object is the apprehended togetherness of the moments. Okay, yeah. So going back to where we were saying before, when you look at a tree, or something like that, you can say, "Oh yeah, this is the tree," but really, this is a tree for you at that specific moment, right? If you tried to say, "Oh, this is a tree" to somebody else who was not there, then they can't see what you see. They can't see your truth. They can't see they don't understand what you're saying. You have to be in that same moment in a way to kind of communicate that same thing. So if you're communicating, across time or space, through writing, whatever, then you're referring to a moment or whatever as a abstract idea, right, in a way. So in essence, the object is the same as the movement, The movement is the unfolding interference of the two moments. I'm seeing that as like this probably is just completely wrong, but I keep thinking of like process theory, how like the real um or the essence of things is like the process of going through things. So, right, the experience that you have, right? When what is the experience of looking at a tree, right? The process of that you are in front of a tree, you're looking at this thing, and you kind of are getting this idea back to it, or back from it. And so, when we say you're looking at this tree, you're talking about like the process of engaging with this experience, engaging with this thing, right? So it creates a sort of movement of information flow and stuff like that. And so when you're communicating to that with somebody else, you're communicating like the process of standing in front of your tree, looking at it, and being in that moment and stuff like that. I don't know. I might be completely wrong with all this stuff. So, but this is kind of what I'm taking what I'm bringing to this as well as taking from it, which itself is its own movement. For us in itself, the universal as principles is the essence of perception, and in contrast to this abstraction, both the moments distinguish that which perceives and that which is perceived are the unessential, right? So it's not really what exactly what we're perceiving at the time, or us, doing the perception that is the essential thing. It's the process, right? It's the experience. It's the movement that you're going through. It's the moment that you're in, that is more of the essence. But in fact, because both are themselves the universals or the essence, both are essential. Yet, since they are related to each other as opposites, only one can be the essential moment in the relation, and the distinction of essential and unessential moment must be shared between them. So, yeah, all right, I see. So he's going into like his dialectic, right? This is why he's saying perceiving things creates its own automatic dialectic, right? Because you're looking at it from, oh, this is something else. Now this is me. I'm doing the looking. Oh, who am I? I am this concept. I am this idea that is separate from that thing. So you're taking that thing apart, as separate from yourself, and it recombining it back into you, and to say, okay, this is what it means to perceive, to look at this tree, right? So he's saying that, okay, it creates this movement of thought, right, of consciousness, of experience, and that is the dialectic. I think that's what he's saying here, setting up that dialectic and all that. One of them, the object defined as a simple entity, is the essence, regardless of whether it is perceived or not. But the art of perceiving as a movement is the unessential moment, the unstable factor, which can as well be as not be, right? So we could be perceiving a thing, and we're in that moment, but then we can just as easily not be perceiving that thing. We could just as easily not be in that moment. Um, so it's unstable in that way. Interesting stuff. Let's see what Dr. Sala says. I'm telling you, man, German sounds like a really interesting language. I gotta look more into, like, I don't know about learning it, but I like etymology and stuff like that a little bit. And this is very interesting how they have their words and phrases set up and stuff like that. Mm. Oh wait, no. I just realized the audio isn't playing on the stream, which is weird because I tested it and it was playing before. Why is it not playing anymore? Hmm. Let me see if I can share the screen again.
Verbiage mean? That means that when we're looking at something like this,
sorry,
we can say
y'all.
a piece of chalk.
I'm not redoing that. Go watch the video if you want to see that beginning part, but I did talk over most of the beginning. But anyways, let's continue.
You can also say pieces of chalk, right? And these are moments within the universal piece of chalk, or white cylindrical thing, or something to write on the blackboard with, or things in Dr. Sadler's hands. It doesn't necessarily matter what universal we're talking about. We can bring a unity to disparate things by putting them all under one universal. So he says that principle has arisen for us. And therefore the way we take in perception is no longer something that just happens to us like sense certainty. Now this is an important point. It's really easy to pass over this as you're reading through this because you're tempted to get to the end of the paragraph, figure out what he's saying. But this is one that's very important to linger over for just a moment. What is Hegel actually getting at in saying this? The principle has arisen for us. What is a principle? A principle is something that is universal. A principle is something that the Greeks called an arche, something that's a beginning, something that determines other things, that provides us with a conception that we can then apply in other cases. So he says, therefore the way we take in perception is no longer something that just happens to us like sense certainty. What's going on here is something that has more logical determinateness, something that we can say has its own internal necessity. It's not purely contingent, like I happen to be walking around and taking in this and taking in that. There's something much more important, something much more intelligent going on. So what is that? He says, with the emergence of the principle, the two moments, we're talking about the object, the universal as one of these moments, and the perceiving I as another moment, two moments which in their appearing merely occur also come into being. That is, they attain a kind of status, a kind of reality that they didn't have, or at least wasn't apparent in them before. So he says, one being the movement of pointing out or the act of perceiving, the other being the same movement as a simple event or the object perceived. So what we have here, from the perceiving I is what it is. It has its being through a kind of agency. It is a perceiver insofar as it is doing perception, right? And the object of the universal doesn't just sit there like a lump, unless it happens to be a lump, of course. It is an event. It involves a kind of movement that is involved in being perceived. This is not something purely static that is just being approached by the active subject. There's an interplay between the two of them. So he says, in essence, the object is the same as the movement. The movement is the unfolding and differentiation of the two moments. What are the two moments? This universal here, this universal there. Now, as he goes on, we're going to be posed with a really interesting question. Where's the essence? Where is the, you might say, the real show? What we're really after here? What's most essential in this process? And Hegel is going to pose to us a couple different possibilities. Maybe neither one of these is really essential. Maybe they're both essential. Maybe just one of them is, but in that case, which one is it? So let's look at each of these in turn. He says, for us, or in itself, the universalist principle is the essence of perception. And in contrast to this abstraction, both the moments distinguished, that which perceives and that which is perceived, are the unessential. So that's a little strange, isn't it? Let's go back over that one more time. What he's saying is, yes, there's a universal here and there's a universal here. And both of them are universals, which means they have something in common. So neither one of them effectively captures what's really going on there. At first, we'd be tempted to say, well, we have like a surplus of universals. We got one over here, we got one over here. This is an essence, that's an essence. But what's going on here is we're losing our hold on what has being. There's something more, there's something surplus here. So this is the process of negation that's going on. He says the universalist principle is the essence of perception. In contrast to this, both the moments are the unessential. But in fact, because both are themselves the universal or the essence, both are essential. So what is it? How do we resolve this? We have A and not A at the same time. Which is it going to be? So he says, since they are related to each other as opposites, we have to make a choice. Only one of them can be the essential element. Now, when we were looking at sense certainty, and we had to deal with this sort of thing, where is the real essence? We generally put it on the side of the object, right? That which is imposing itself upon our consciousness, that's what consciousness is taking in. Instead, over here, we're going to say with perception, at least at the very beginning of it, that the perceiving I is what is most universal. The perceiver, not the perceived. The perceiver is doing the same sort of perceiving no matter what content we're dealing with over here. So that's a very promising beginning point, isn't it? He says one of them, the object must be defined as simple entity, simple being, something that is the essence regardless of whether it's perceived or not. But the act of perceiving as a movement then becomes the unessential moment. So we have another dynamic shift here, and we're going to lose our grasp on what is really essential, and we're going to waver back and forth throughout the rest of this section. So we had the universal taking it away, we go here, and now we come back over here once again. He says the act of perceiving is the unessential moment, the unstable factor, which can as well be as not be. So let's think about what's going on here. Over here we have being in itself. It is, whether there's a perceiver to perceive it or not. Or at least we think so at this point. Over here we have the perceiver. There's no perception if there isn't a perceiver to do the action of perceiving. And yet it's contingent whether there's going to be a perceiver. So that's what we're going to begin with. That's our starting point for this section.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Very trippy in a way.
This object must now be defined more precisely, and the definition must be developed briefly from the result that has been reached. The more detailed development does not belong here. Since the principle of the object, the universal, is in its simplicity a mediated universal, the object must express its nature in its own self. This it does by showing itself to be the thing with many properties. The wealth of sense knowledge belongs to perception, not to immediate certainty, for which it was only the source of instances. For only perception contains negation, that is, difference or manifoldness within its own essence.
Break that down as well. This object must now be defined more precisely, and a definition must be developed briefly from the result that has been reached. More detailed development does not belong here. Okay, just going to the essence thing, how we can't like define it by within itself, right? Yeah, we can't really define it by within itself because it requires perception. It requires us to observe it, to look around in order for us to understand and define the thing. Since the principle of the object, the universal, is in its simplicity a mediated universal, the object must express its nature in its own self, which is limited because it can only express so much. But it's mediated, mediated universal, because we have to we'll look at it, think about it, and stuff like that, in order to perceive it, in order to do more with it. This it does by showing itself to be the thing with many properties. The wealth of sense knowledge belongs to perception, not to immediate certainty, for which it was only the source of instances. Right? Because when we first look at the thing, we don't actually know exactly what it is, right? You have to perceive it more. You have to do more in order to figure out what those properties are, for instance, right? It might be hard, cold or wet, or, tasty or not, stuff like that. You don't know these things at first glance, at the first instance. You have to analyze it more. For only perception contains negation, that is, differences or manifoldness within its own essence. Ooh. Yeah. So only when we perceive it are we able to say, okay, it's not that, it's this, it's not that, it's this. So have that manifoldness, that multiplicity, I guess, that multiple, size to it. It's just multidimensional, things like that. We get that from actually perceiving it. Okay. I think I could.
Paragraph 112 is very short, and there's not a lot going on there, but what is going on is something that we do want to talk a little bit about, because it's going to show us where we're going in just a few more paragraphs. So he begins by talking about the object, and he's reminding us once again that the object has been revealed as the universal, right? And he says we're going to define it more precisely, and the definition must be developed briefly from the result that has been reached. So we're summing things up at this point, trying to get our head around where we've been so far. So he says the principle of the object, the universal, is in its simplicity a mediated universal. That means that the self of the object is going to have to contain that mediacy. And by this point in the study, whenever you see the term mediacy, you should be thinking, aha, we're moving ahead with something. Things are not going to be in a couple paragraphs what they are right now. But you should also be thinking a couple other terms. Like you should be thinking negation. You should be thinking how things are connected with each other. Here, Hegel is going to figure it in terms of difference and multiplicity, or as the translation here has manifoldness, mannigfaltigkeit. It can be translated as either way, multiplicity or manifoldness. And we're going to move from the object to the thing. I suppose it's good to know that he's talking about the ding, that has certain resonances, because Kant had said, well, we can never really get to the thing in itself, and Hegel is going to, go beyond that. This has all sorts of other connotations that Hegel doesn't himself necessarily intend, but later people are going to pick up on and run with, the meaning of the thing. But, so if we just stick with thing, that's fine, the English, cognate of this. And what's really important here is that we're looking at the object as the thing with many qualities or many properties. Eigenschaften. He's going to do a play on words with the eigen, dealing with that in a little bit. And when we talk about something having properties, again, think about this piece of chalk. What properties does it have? It has hardness, right? It has a certain durability. It has a certain taste. I'm not going to taste it right now because I know what chalk tastes like. It's white. It's chalky, if we want to be circular about it. And it fits in my hand in a certain way. It's very dry. It's actually drier than most dry things because it makes my hands dry as well. Those are properties. Those are the ways in which we know the thing. And in a certain sense, these properties are themselves universals, but they're being perceived, they're being grasped through sense knowledge. That's what the richness of sense knowledge provides us with. When we look at a thing, we see its properties. We take those properties in. It's not for nothing that the ancients often thought of us sort of taking in some sort of metaphorical way, the thing itself into ourselves and grasping its properties within our soul or our mind. Now, Hegel is going to stress, he's just mentioning it here, but this is going to play a very important role, that these properties are marked by difference and multiplicity among themselves. And we'll just leave off with that because we're going to see how this plays out. But the key thing here is that perception, or knowledge through the senses, is taking place by moving to look at the thing, which has many properties.
Good stuff.
The this is, therefore, established as not this, or as something superseded, and hence not as nothing, but as a determinate nothing, the nothing of a content, that is, of the this. Consequently, the sense element is still present, but not in the way it was supposed to be in the position of immediate certainty, not as the singular item that is meant, but as a universal, or as that which will be defined as a property. Supersession exhibits its true twofold meaning, which we have seen in the negative. It is at once a negating and a preserving. Our nothing, as the nothing of the this, preserves its immediacy and is itself sensuous, but it is a universal immediacy. Being, however, is a universal in virtue of its having mediation or the negative within it. When it expresses this in its immediacy, it is a differentiated, determinate property. As a result, many such properties are established simultaneously, one being the negative of another. Since they are expressed in the simplicity of the universal, these determinacies, which are properties strictly speaking only through the addition of a further determination, are related only to themselves. They are indifferent to one another. Each is on its own and free from the others.
All right. Let me back that up a little bit. All right, the this therefore is established as not this, or as something superseded, and hence not as nothing, but as a determinate nothing, the nothing of a content of the this. That's that's a trippy sentence right there. But so when you're looking at the thing, or the this, whatever, you're trying to understand something, you realize it by what it's not, right? Hence, that is nothing, but as the determinate nothing. Okay, but you're kind of saying, okay, it's specifically not this thing, it's this other thing, stuff like that. Consequently, goodness, the sense element is still present, but not in the way it was supposed to be, in the position of immediate certainty, not as the singular item that is meant, but as a universal, or as that which will be defined as a property. So by, you can say, okay, this is hard, this is wet, this is whatever. So you get an understanding of what it is and what it's not by my kind of creating this property, or these properties. Supersession exhibits its true twofold meaning, which we have seen in the negative, is at once a negating and a preserving. Yeah, okay. Our nothing, as the nothing of the this, preserves its immediacy and is itself sensuous, but it is a universal immediacy. That's interesting. And nothing, as the nothing of the this, preserves its immediacy and is itself sensuous, but is a universal immediacy. Okay. So universal, again, immediacy, meaning something that it's like not immediate, like in the moment, but it's like immediate because we're constantly having to mediate with it, right? We're constantly having to perceive it and sense it in order to experience it, in order to know what it is, and gain information about it and stuff like that. Being, however, is a universal in virtue of its having mediation or the negative within it. When it expresses this in its immediacy, it is a differentiated, determinable, or determinate property. As a result, many such properties are established simultaneously, one being the negative of another. Ooh, interesting. So being, as in, maybe the is that more like us, the perceiver or the perceived, but either way, it's like being as in what it is. Um, not quite sure how to like say this in simple words, but I think I understand it. Maybe not. Probably won't. Probably don't.
which are properties, strictly speaking, only through the addition of a further determination, are related only to themselves. They are indifferent to one another. Each is on its own and free from the others. But the simple self-identical universality is itself in turn distinct and free from these determinate properties it has. It is pure relating of self to self, or the medium in which all these determinacies are, and in which as a simple unity they therefore interpenetrate, but without coming into contact with one another. For it is precisely through participating in this universality that they exist indifferently on their own account. This abstract universal medium, which can be called simply thinghood or pure essence, is nothing else than what here and now have proved themselves to be. That is, a simple togetherness of a plurality. But the many are, in their determinateness, simple universals themselves. This salt is a simple here, and at the same time manifold. It is white and also tart, also cubical in shape of a specific gravity, and so forth. All these many properties are in a single simple here, in which therefore they interpenetrate. None has a different here from the others, but each is everywhere in the same here in which the others are. And at the same time, without being separated by different heres, they do not affect each other in this interpenetration. The whiteness does not affect the cubical shape, and neither affects the tart taste. On the contrary, since each is itself a simple relating of self to self, it leaves the others alone and is connected with them only by the indifferent also. This also is thus the pure universal itself, or the medium, the thinghood which holds them together in this way.
A lot of stuff there.
There's a lot.
But yeah, basically, I'm looking at it as like, him just breaking it down how these manifold kind of properties and different ways of seeing a thing can interrelate with each other, by being here, by being in that process, by being in that moment. It allows these properties to come together. However, based on our current understanding of things, we might even go so far as to say that some of those properties are intermingled, or do kind of intermingle, or interconnect, or kind of depend on one another, because like the shape of a thing could be a reason as to its texture, or as to its taste even, like with pineapple, right? The reason why you get that stingy kind of feel when you eat it, when you taste it, is because of the structure of the pineapple, right? Like on the microscopic level, the little barbs in there is like literally piercing your tongue. So it's like making little holes, make little damage that you do when you eat a pineapple, but it's good, right? So it's not just that the tart flavor, creates that stinky feeling. It's that the structure of the pineapple creates some of that flavor as well. So, in some cases, these properties could maybe intermingle or depend upon each other in some ways.
Going on in paragraph 113, and you might see it as something almost like a labyrinth that you need an Ariadne's thread to make your way through, but what we're going to see is that a lot of what he's talking about here turns out to be fairly straightforward, so long as we just take it one step at a time. So let's do that. Let's look at what he's talking about first. The book that we're using, the translation, uses supersession as Aufhebung in the German. We've seen that Aufhebung or Aufheben in the verbal cognitive of the term, is used to describe this process of negating but also preserving at the same time that he's talking about in this section. And it's when dialectical progress takes place that there's some sort of Aufhebung. Not necessarily from one entire stage of consciousness to another, but also it describes the process of movement within the stage of consciousness as it develops. So he begins by talking about this kind of general schema. We begin with a this, and we negate it, so we get a not this, and then the question is that not this a nothing, or is it something else? Is it a not nothing? It's not a pure nothing. Instead, it's a determinate nothing. And that determinate nothing refers back to the this because it's a nothingness of the this. That was there in the this the whole time, just sort of waiting to be brought to light, waiting to be made determinate. Now, why is he talking about that at this point? Why is he just jumping into all this metaphysical stuff? Well, because it has something to do with our perception. So we began with the sense element, as he calls it, and we began with it in certainty. We treated it as a this. I'm there. What's present impinges itself upon my consciousness. I take it in. And as it turned out, it's not quite so simple as that. We found that ultimately the truth of sense certainty lay in the universal, that the singular, which was being meant, which was being intended whenever we said the word this, turned out to be, in certain respects, unutterable, unsayable in language. And because language and thought are connected together in a certain way, even unthinkable. And the universal became where the weight, the gravity moved to. And now we're seeing that we're moving, to further understand this, to make it more concrete, we're understanding in terms of the property. the universal immediacy, as Hegel's going to call it. So let's actually look at that little characterization that he has. He says, our nothing, as the nothing of the this that was over here, preserves its immediacy and is itself sensuous. So when we're perceiving something, when we're engaging in perception of a property, it's not that we're no longer using our senses. It's not a purely intellectual activity. We are still using our senses, but we perceive the property in the thing. I perceive the whiteness in the chalk. Now, you might say, oh, wait a second, Hegel, Dr. Sadler, all you're really seeing are light waves coming from that. And in a certain sense, that's what modern science teaches us. But if you actually want to do a phenomenological analysis of what consciousness is like, our consciousness reaches out into the world of things. And it perceives the properties. There's something more than just light waves going on. There is an active role that we're playing in constituting that, as the phenomenologist would say. Mm-hmm. So it's universal, because it's grasping the universal, but it's grasping it in immediacy or in sensibility. Now, Hegel's not going to stay there for very long. Anytime you see the word immediacy, figure that we're not done yet, right? So he goes on, and he says that when we look at a property more closely, what do we find out? Its immediacy is a differentiated determinate property. And what does that mean? Well, here's where we need to do a little bit of erasing, just to get us ready. When you differentiate, what's going on? If I'm going to differentiate, say, white chalk from black board, we have two things, don't we? Or I say, I'm a human being, this is just a tool for my use. Or I'm a human being, and you're another human being. We're differentiating. We're splitting things into a multiplicity. And when we do that in terms of properties, in fact, let me get rid of even this, because we're not going to need that right now. We have a differentiated, determinate property of some sort. Now, what it means for that to be differentiated is it has to be differentiated against another property, or multiple properties. We can differentiate in multiple ways. We can say the chalk is white, it is also not black, it is also not red, it is dry, it is not wet. We're differentiating that way, right? We're also making it more determinate that way. But we can also differentiate within the perception of the piece of chalk. We can say it is white, and it also is hard, and it also is cylindrical, and it also is pointed, and it also, you see how we're doing that there? We're describing a thing in terms of its properties. So he goes on and he says, as a result, many such properties are established simultaneously. It doesn't matter which one we originally begin with. The chalk could be white, it could be hard, it could be, tasting funny, it could be dry. It doesn't matter which one we actually start with, because all the properties are there simultaneously, that is, within the same experience, within the same time. He goes on and he says, one of them is the negative of another. Since they're expressed in the simplicity of the universal, these determinacies, which are properties strictly speaking only through the addition of a further determination, are related only to themselves. They are indifferent to each other. Now, we could put more properties on the board. I'm going to keep it simple. Just keep it at 3, right? So they're originally indifferent to each other. The white doesn't care that the white is there in something that's also hard. The hard doesn't care, as far as being hard, about the whiteness that's there. They don't care about each other, so far as they care. We're doing a little anthropomorphizing here. So he says, these determinacies are indifferent to one another. Each is on its own and free from the others. So we have, we're going to use the chalk here. We have, say, whiteness. Whiteness is what it is. It's here, we sense it, but it's just by itself. Hardness. Dryness. You don't actually need to know anything about whiteness in order to understand what dryness is, or at least to perceive it through your senses, right? Now, things get more interesting when we say, well, yeah, but don't we have a piece of chalk here? Well, yes, we do. So we need to go on. He says the simple self-identical universality is itself in turn distinct and free from these determinate properties it has. It's a pure relating of self to self, or the medium in which all these properties are. And in which, as a simple unity, they therefore interpenetrate. They are able to be there with each other. They are able to interconnect. They are able to be part of one experience. But without coming into contact with one another, for it is precisely through participating in this that they exist indifferently on their own account. So what is this medium? What is holding everything together? What is providing them the locus in which this can take place? And that's a trick question. That's going to lead us in a couple different directions. What's the first one that we would think of? It says this abstract universal medium, which can be called simply thinghood, or pure essence, is nothing else than what here and now have proved themselves to be, a simple togetherness of a plurality. We have a plurality, a multiplicity, and we have something here that's a universal. It's bringing them all together within some determinate thing. In this case, the thinghood happens to be a piece of chalk. In another case, it could be a cup of coffee. In another case, it could be this blue glasses cleaner fabric, right? We can pick anything that we want, and we can talk about this in general ways because we're not just thinking about, this property and that property and that property. We're thinking about the ways properties and things relate themselves to each other in general. Yeah. And he's right. These properties are to a certain degree independent of each other, and the only thing that allows them to interpenetrate is this medium. So he says, the many are in their determinateness simple universals themselves. So we have a universal here, right? And each of these properties is also a universal. So this is really quite extraordinary, isn't it? We have like a whole bag of universals, and they're all connected with each other. And we have a universal that's able to take in other universals. And what this means is we're able to describe the process. We're able to use language which works with universals in order to make sense of this. We're able to think this. We're not just stuck going, and making gestures and sounds that intend something. We're able to communicate with each other. We're able to do this to such a degree that I can describe to you something that you've not yet experienced by taking building blocks and putting them together and you constructing them into some sort of thing in your imagination. We do this all the time. So he says, the many are in their determinate as simple universals themselves. He uses the example of salt. So let's actually follow through with salt. The salt is a simple here and at the same time manifold. The salt is white and also tart or salty, right? It is also cubical in shape of a certain specific gravity. All these many properties are in a single universal here, in which therefore they interpenetrate. They're able to interconnect with each other. Not in themselves, not in what they are, in themselves as universals, but as moments within this greater unity that we ourselves grasp. He says, none has a different here from the others, but each is everywhere in the same here in which the others are. The piece of chalk is white throughout, it's hard throughout, it's chalky throughout. The salt is the same way. At the same time, without being separated by different heres, they do not affect each other in their interpenetrations. Insofar as I'm writing on the board and you see something white here, what's the qualities that actually are being perceived by you? The whiteness. Also, I suppose you could say the ductibility, the malleability of the chalk as well. But the fact that it's dry, you don't care about that, and neither does the chalkboard. Certainly not what you're getting through this camera. There are certain properties that are able to do what they do independently of each other depending on the context. They're able to do that because they interpenetrate within this here that is the thing. So he says, at the same time, without being separated, they don't affect each other. The whiteness does not affect the cubical shape, neither affects the tart taste. On the contrary, since each is itself a symbol relating of self to self, each of them involves this circular relation to self. Each of them is a complex whole because it is a universal. It leaves the others alone and is connected with them only by the indifferent also. This is white and also dry and also hard. Or if we're talking about salt, this is white and also salty and also cubical. We can multiply these properties as much as we want. The same sort of dynamic would hold. He says this also is also a pure universal itself, or the medium, the thinghood, which holds them together in this way. So what does it mean for something to be a thing? Let's pause here for a moment. For something to be a thing means that it introduces this also into the manifold of its properties, and it allows them to interpenetrate with each other and also to be radically distinct from one another. That's what a universal does when we're thinking about many pieces of chalk. But now we're thinking about how universals work within sensible particulars that we are grasping under universals.
Awesome stuff. So I even have much to say on that last part, but yeah, like the way Hegel breaks this stuff down. Don't get me wrong, I wish it was in simple language, but I understand why in context. But it's very interesting, right? And it tells us a lot about oh, he's still going today. He's still going. What chapter is that? I don't know, but yeah, tells us a lot about like how the depth of human thought, right? And like how we're able to think about things from in such a deep level. I always find it incredibly fascinating, things like that. But yeah, we'll end it there. Thank you as always for listening, for watching with me, for learning with me. Let me know what you learned this section. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episode, most likely later in the week. I'm gonna think about doing an episode every day this week. We'll see. But yeah, thanks as always and have a great day. See ya. Bye.